begin by speaking a little bit about my background with the topic at hand, which is racism, so that you can better understand how racism itself has impacted me as an individual. And then inshallah we will, God willing, we will go into what racism is or what it means and how it happens, and eventually to get to the root of where racism began in order to understand the cure for racism, looking at it through the Islamic perspective, as I found it to be the most universal and thought-provoking, universal way of looking at how we live as human beings, with how we partake in this world basically with one another and our differences. To begin, I'm originally from Colombia in South America, and my parents never thought about migrating to America, as maybe many of the parents who have come and migrated to this country, many of your parents possibly, and many other people who have been coming, since 40, 50 years back. There's been a massive wave of migration to this country. When my parents decided to come to America for better opportunity, I was 8 years old. All I knew were people who looked like me and spoke the same language as myself in Colombia. Our native language is Spanish. And I remember feeling like everybody was like that in the world. Everybody spoke the same language and everybody looked the same. But when I came to America, no doubt there was a culture shock. I remember when I was 8 years old, I was in 3rd grade, and I didn't know any English whatsoever. And the teacher was speaking in English, and I didn't understand what she was saying. And back home in Colombia, we used to ask somebody who sat next to us if we didn't understand something. Everybody helped one another. And when I tried to do this with the guy who was sitting next to me, even though he was Latino and spoke Spanish, he tried to avoid me and didn't, want to even look at me. And so the teacher came to me, and she looked upset, and she said a whole lot of things. And I told her, and so she told him to tell me something. She told him not to talk while she was talking. So I told him to tell her that I didn't understand what she was saying. And then she told him to tell me that if I didn't understand, just to be quiet in her class and not say anything, to not disturb. So I was 8 years old, and I remember going home, and I remember crying. I went, locked myself up in the room, and I told my parents I never want to go to that school ever again. And I realized right then and there that I felt like I was by myself, kind of isolated from being able to interact, with the environment. With that comes adapting to the environment, and one of the things that exists in public schools and in schools in general for immigrant children is ESL, English as a Second Language. I started realizing that by joining this English as a Second Language, no doubt I was picking up the English language quick, but at the same time I would see the teasing that would come from other students, especially in the African American community, which in the part of the city where I lived in Houston, it was mainly Latino or African American. And I remember they used to tease us and call us all Mexicans. And being Colombian, you're totally different than a Mexican. The same way a Chinese person is different than a Japanese person or a Korean. So at that age, understanding this name calling and this teasing, it pushes you to, get ahead. And eventually you pick up the language, and eventually, without realizing, you start doing the same things they used to do to you, and you start doing it to others. And so, when I was around 13 years old, and I was in the middle school, I already knew English, I already knew how to dress the part, I already knew my environment. And at that point in time, 3 movies came out that affected our environment greatly. One of them was filmed here in New York City. It was called New Jack City, a movie by Wesley Snipes. And the other 2 were shot in LA. One of them was called Boys in the Hood with Ice Cube, and the other one was called Menace to Society. When these movies came out, for the very first time ever in my environment, I saw a gang come up. And they called themselves New Jack Hustlers. It was African Americans coming together because they were African American, and they began walking around school and saying that that school was theirs. And it got to the point where they would go up to any Latino that they saw and they would spit on their face just because they were Latino. I remember hearing a guy went to the restroom and he got jumped. He got beat up by 5 people just because he was Latino. And so a lot of these guys used to live in the same apartment complex I used to live in. And I used to have to walk to school, and I remember them being either in front or in the back. And you knew every single day it was pressure. And you knew at any point in time they would come and possibly violate you. The way I grew up, my father taught me to respect people, but at the same time make myself be respected. So if somebody came to violate me, I should defend myself. And I always hope that nobody would, put me through that test, because my father taught me how to box when I was little, and I really thought I had the upper hand. And sure enough, one day I was talking to a girl right outside the apartment where I used to live, and the leader of this gang, he walked by, and I guess he didn't like that I was talking to this girl. She was white American. And so he came up to me, and I thought he was going to say something or try to, make me look funny in front of her or something like that. But he cut right to the chase, and he just hit me in my face. And if I wouldn't have been sitting up against something, I might have fallen. He was in 8th grade. He was a lot bigger than me. He played football. And I remember my immediate response was just to defend myself. And I began just swinging. And he hit me one time, and that was the last time he hit me. I think I've hit him 20, 30 times until people got me off of him. And so what happens next is that we end up going to school, and he had, big, knots. We'll call them knots, right? He had swellings all over his head, and everybody started saying in school that I beat him up. And so what happens when you beat up a gang leader is that the crown of respect that he's wearing, then all of a sudden gets put on you. Okay? So now you got all this respect. But what happens with that is that you become a walking target, because everybody from their side is wanting to retaliate and take that back. So at that early age, a lot of the Latinos in school realized that I stood up to these people, while many of them were just getting beat up. And so they all came together and they said, you know what, let's just gather up and we all protect each other. In the end, we're all Latinos, and we're like a big, large family. And so before I knew it, somebody came up with the name La Familia, which means the family. And before we knew it, we were a gang. I never, in my intention, had it to make a gang. But understanding that environment, how they were becoming bigger and bigger in size, we began initiating people into the gang. So we'd actually beat somebody basically for about 3 minutes so that they could be part of the gang. And it started gaining some speed, and momentum. And before we knew it, there was a lot of bystanders. I have friends of mine that ended up, losing the right eye from a shotgun blast. There were drive-by shootings happening. And it was the emulation of these movies that we were seeing, because we never had that in the environment. So the movies kind of affected that reality. And before we knew it, there was this feud between African American and Latinos that ended up in a lot of bad circumstances, and people ended up going to jail and so on. When I had death threats, I was about 13 years old. They used to call my mom in the middle of the night and tell her that they were going to kill me. So my parents ended up moving me to another school. And this other school was about 20 minutes away from that school. And on my first day of class, when I'm going to my locker, I'm minding my own business, and I didn't want any problems whatsoever. A Mexican gang came, and they tapped me on my, shoulder. And when I turned around, they said, we're Southwest Cholos, the name of this gang, and they said you're either in or you're out. Basically, they either beat me down to become part of their gang, or I was going to be outside of their gang and they were going to beat me down because I refused. So, understanding that mentality, I was really shocked that I had just had problems with the African Americans. Now I was going to have problems with Latinos. Being Latino, having problems with Latinos didn't make sense to me. So I defended myself, hit one of them just so that they would see that I wouldn't back down, And it's funny how the African American gangs in that school came to get my back, as we say, came to help me out, because they had problems. But because I stood up to them, then all of a sudden now the African Americans were the ones who liked me. So this is a very confusing part of my life. And it got to the point where after certain people lost their lives, unfortunately, and after almost losing my life one day, I was shipped out to Colombia in South America. My parents shipped me away to get my act straight. And I remember going to Colombia and I used to just see black and white. I used to see who was from what side and what they were and what part of group they were from. And I realized something in South America that shocked me, in Colombia. Regardless of what the media says about Colombia, having drug cartels and kidnappings and all this sort of negative press, I found a sense of solidarity over there that I never had, and the sense of brotherhood that I was always looking for. And I realized that family values and good manners and becoming educated were a priority for a lot of the youth out there. And I was shocked because we were playing games over here. We were just losing our time, wasting our time. Up to that point, I realized that this issue of racism, a lot of what was happening and how I made decisions had to be changed. So I'll stop at that level right there. Eventually, I came back when I was 18 years old back to America. It was a different perspective. And there's much to say, about how I changed my attitude. But what I'd like to talk about is this topic of racism and how it happens. After doing some thorough research, before I was Muslim, I tried to study about racism, tried to study about different beliefs. I studied Buddhism, Hinduism, Kabbalah, Jewish thought, Zennism, even Jeet Kune Do for Bruce Lee's, philosophy. As a non-Muslim, as a person who didn't know about Islam, many of us, we're just seeking to understand how to better live life, and sometimes we don't even think there's a purpose to life. And we self-medicate. We drink and we take drugs because something's not right inside of us. But instead of addressing that issue, we just kind of numb ourselves. And so, at that point in time, I start realizing and finding out that different religions or different beliefs always kind of secluded or pull certain people to the side, or foreign groups, and one person who didn't have this certain title or wasn't part of this group, and so on. So I began to study a little bit, and I'd like to kind of shed some light on this topic because it's something that I personally had to study myself to get myself right. There's organizations like the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, that categorize racism as the belief that a particular race is superior or inferior to another, that a person's social and moral traits are predetermined by his or her inborn biological characteristics. So if you're born and you have dark skin, you have black skin, according to people who judge based on race, there is a demoralization about that individual, a dehumanization sometimes. Sometimes the aspect of beauty and attributes like this can't even be attributed to them. The positivity of intelligence has been demeaned or lessened just by physical characteristics. So it so happens that a French anthropologist, Emile Durkheim, in the late 1800s, he studied that the very essence of human beings breaking apart and becoming groups came from the nature of solidarity, meaning the seeking of brotherhood or sisterhood. And he studied primitive societies and he studied advanced societies. And he found out from the most primitive of people, like the Indians, who just lived out there in nature, they all looked alike, they spoke the same language, but they had a problem. That they couldn't find ways to categorize themselves and make differences within themselves. Because the monogamy of just being one race or one color or one people, in and of itself, is not natural. People find ways to be able to identify between a group of people and another group of people. And so within their belief system is that they have a direct kind of relationship with nature. And they start having this sort of animal, plant sort of belief with spiritual sort of relationship with their environment. And then they break themselves up into groups like the people of the thunder, the people of the rain. And they start invoking certain, animals and things like this, and they start calling themselves the people of something. And this becomes what is known to be totemism, which is the belief basically in this animal sort of plant, nature-like spirit in human beings. That's from the primitive of people. From the diverse cultures and the modern sort of societies, let's say in the New World, we may not have this, same color, same language situation. Places like the United States, for example, is very pluralistic. And so what happens whenever a society is so diverse? What is the issue at hand? The issue then is kind of the opposite. In that diversity, human beings try to solidify one specific identity and kind of come together as a people. And people begin to make things like emblems or colors their way of being able to come together. Give you an example. We're here at a university, right? This is Rutgers University. You guys have a football team, I take it, right? Basketball team and all that. Do you all have any other university that y'all have as rivals? Like every single year there is that last game, or there is this rivalry between sports. What school is that? Pittsburgh. Okay. If you just left alone to say that there's all kinds of different universities and colleges, human beings going there will not stand for that. It's too general. So what human beings do is they react, and they want to be, they want to feel like they're one body in that university itself. And so you have a team name. And a lot of these team names are names of animals. And the mascot looks like an animal. And specific colors are used. And then this groupism begins to happen, and the whole issue of cheering for your people eventually naturally goes down to not wanting to give victory to others. And it ends up sometimes bringing down the others, right? And sometimes even attributing evil to them, right? In the most innocent of ways, they suck, right? They're no good, and all this here. So the whole issue of putting some people down and bringing yourself up based on your group is something of a natural nature. And this was really important to understand before we even look at the Islamic perspective, because Islam is a way of life. Islam is not a form of categorization like human beings do. This innate nature of human beings to categorize themselves culturally leads to somehow bringing your group up and people who look like you or belong to your group, and whether knowingly or unknowingly, bringing some other people down. And that's the essence of racism. Racism is culturally constructed, and sometimes even by default. There are places like India, for example, that have caste systems, right? A specific class of people has been ethnically categorized that these people are high-ranking members of society, and the limit or the ease of people's chances there are marked by a caste, by a class. That comes from human beings. But race goes way further to divide the entire human species basically into a limited number of categories that are ideologically associated with variable degrees of attributes like intelligence, beauty, capacity for ethical behavior, saying that some people act like animals or they're like animals. Or as it happened with the African American community here in America, they weren't considered a full human being. These characteristics basically are physical traits. So I ask you, how is it that an individual can be proud of one skin color, being that he or she didn't even choose that skin color to begin with? None of us was born and chose our physical characteristics. If we ask any one of ourselves, did we even choose to be born to begin with? We will see that we had no will whatsoever personally, because when we're kids, when we're newborn babies, we don't even have a will. We have everything done for us. So how can an individual be proud of something he or she didn't gain on personal merit? This in and of itself goes back to the aspect of ignorance, which leads to arrogance. In every problem, and some of you may be studying medicine, for example, you'll know that there are symptoms, and then there is the root of an issue. In order to go and find a cure for something, you have to understand the root of an issue. And this is where Islam and the Islamic perspective really comes in handy. In the next few minutes, I would like to introduce you to the Islamic perspective about this issue of racism. And we'll identify the root of the issue and where this began. And it's very interesting to see that everything later on kind of unfolds and becomes clear from an Islamic perspective. In Islam, we believe that all of this is created by one source. The word Islam means to submit to the will of that one source. The way we submitted in being born, we had no say. We submitted in the way we look, we had no say. We were born in submission, every single one of us. Whether we're Muslim now or not Muslim now, at the point of your birth, you were in full submission, which in and of itself, the sense of the aspect of the word, to submit, Islam, to be a Muslim, that's the nature of every human being, regardless of what faith they may claim now as grown-ups. The very nature of the human being, or inclination, is to understand somehow that there is a call out of help between himself or herself and something higher. And so we understand from the Islamic teachings that God Almighty, the creator of the heavens and the earth, when He went to create the human being, He ordered the angel Gabriel to take sand from different parts of this creation of the world. Some sand from a very soft place, like the shore of the ocean. Very soft sand, maybe very white sand. But then there is sand that is in the Rocky Mountains and is very coarse and rough, and it's darker in its color. Then there's some reddish sand. Then when the different sort of sand was taken from these different places, God Almighty brought it together with water, and then He made man, which we understand to be Adam. Many people don't think that Muslims believe in Adam, the first human being to be created. We understand from Islamic teachings that Adam was created from sand of these variations of places and water to be into clay. And there came a point in time that he was just like pottery, and he was nothing but the outside shell, and there was no soul in it yet. And there were another species, which are the angels, made out of light, and another species called the jinn, which are made out of fire. Different creations. And from amongst these species made out of fire was one which in the Arabic language is called Iblis, which people understand nowadays to be the Satan. We understand in Islam that he wasn't necessarily bad to begin with. He was so righteous that he was at the status of the angels. And when God created Adam and He had him in that form, the angels and Iblis, or the Satan at that point in time, were submissive to his order. And what happened here was a very interesting thing. The Satan, went up to this specific structure, or this sculpture, let's say, and he kind of kicked it or hit it. And it sounded hollow, like something hollow that doesn't have anything in it. Kind of rang it like a bell. Boom. And he said, this creation is weak. If I am given control over it, then basically I'll manipulate it. And if it is given control over me, I will not obey it. This was the very first encounter of Satan with man. Then the creator of the heavens and the earth blew the soul into Adam, into this clay-like structure, and he taught him the name of things. This is the sky, this is a tree, this is the moon. And the angels asked the creator of the heavens and the earth an interesting question. They said, why would you create a species which would cause corruption on the earth and shed blood? So the angels had a presence and understanding that human beings would be of this nature, of sort of a destructive nature. And they would have shed blood, they would have wars, and they would fight one another. And so the creator of the heavens and the earth told them, I know what you know not. And he asked them to go and ask Adam about the names of things, which they themselves didn't have knowledge of. So because God gave man the innate nature of understanding and knowledge, the angels were taught from the beginning that even though they were 100% submissive in nature, they didn't have a free will. And that this creature that was now being created, he had a free will. He could learn and he could obey, but he could also disobey. And that free will is what made him of a greater creation than even the angels. And therefore he told the angels to bow down to Adam. To bow down to him. And from amongst the angels, there was Iblis, the Satan. And when this order was given by God Almighty, all the angels bowed down except Iblis, except Satan. And right then and there, the disobedience of that action basically was the initiation of him and his true nature of mischief or disobedience. This is the breaking point where he became wretched, basically, in nature. But we understand in the Quran that the creator of the heavens and earth asked him, why did you not bow? And he answered, and the Arabic language is beautiful. In the Quran, he said, أَنَا خَيْرٌ مِّنْهُ خَلَقْتَنِي مِنْ نَارٍ وَخَلَقْتَهُ مِنَ الطِّينِ. I am better than him. He answered, he said, I'm better than him because you created me from fire and you created him from clay. Meaning this is a weak creation. Now, if this individual knows the power of creation from the Creator, and he sits there and questions his wisdom, and tells him that because he made him in a certain way makes him better than him, that is the very beginning of racism. He thought he was better than man. So any human being on the face of the earth who thinks himself or herself better than someone else is following the example of this individual at that point in time. And that's the root of racism. So we understand that root to have led many people to destroy one another. And when you see places like Rwanda and you see the massive killings that happen all over the world, sometimes it even happens within the same people of the same color, but just because of the different classes and the different makeups. And these are all categorizations made by human beings. So when we understand that eventually from Adam, from one of his ribs, came his mate, Eve. And from this male and this female came many men and women. From these men and women come variations of colors and variations of many different cultures. And they were spread throughout the land. In places that were very rough, places that were very soft in the land. Some people are very rough in their features, coarse, let's say dark, others are light. The same way within human beings, there are some people that are very easygoing in nature, and there are some people that are very stern. This we understand from the way that human beings were created. And when we began this program today, the brother recited some verses of the Quran where he gives us a key to understand the very nature of how this is an amazing way of forming this creation, and how the creator of the heavens and the earth with his wisdom did things with wisdom, and sometimes because of our lack of understanding him as a source and how he wanted things, it leads us basically to destroy one another. The verse in the Quran that the brother recited was, "O mankind, we have created you from a male and a female and made you into nations and tribes that you may know one another." This is the key, that you may know one another, not despise one another. Because when human beings get to know one another, they'll understand the underlying qualities of their humanity. When people take the time to really think about the other person's position, when people take the time to see that the characteristics that are different from amongst them is embedded within this creation so that we can get to know one another. Imagine if all of us were the same skin color. If we all spoke the same language. What would we do when we sit down to eat? What's there to talk about? Everybody's the same, right? But if you're different, you have a lot to talk about. And so this is the very purpose of why human beings were created in this way. And then it goes on, the verse goes on to say that verily the most honorable of you with the creator of the heavens and the earth is the one that is most God conscious, the one that obeys him the most. And then it goes on to say that verily he is the all-knowing and the all-aware, the all-hearing. Whenever we come to judge one another, maybe we look at what's apparent. But when the creator of the heavens and the earth judges us, he judges us based on what's in the heart. So even though we're different, he's not concerned about the way we look because he created us. What he's concerned about is how well we pass this test of living as one human race and giving each other the rights of being brothers and sisters in humanity. And this is eventually the very cure that is found in the Quran and the authentic teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. If there has been any sort of misinformation through the media about Muslims, only caring about Muslims and not caring about people who don't share their faith, you have to ask yourself, how many Muslims do you know? Have you taken the time to sit down with the Muslims to see what they think? Because if we have someone else speak on our behalf, you know, according to what the media says, I'm Colombian, so I'm supposed to be here selling y'all drugs today. Right? If somebody's African American, they're supposed to be, I don't know, you know, stealing something from a convenience store or something. There's all these stereotypes that are all around us. But we know, when we get to know people, all these different traits and qualities that we see, we start analyzing the way they live, and you can't generalize people. And this is at the very root, basically, of ignorance, and it leads to destruction. And I will end and conclude with a statement of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Or actually, this is a verse of the Quran where the creator of the heavens and the earth speaks about the very nature of how this message, this very same information has been disseminated throughout mankind since the beginning. Adam ending with the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, including Jesus and Moses and Noah and Abraham and all of the messengers throughout time. Because we as Muslims believe in every single one of them. The creator of the heavens and the earth says in the Quran, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا مِنْ رَسُولٍ إِلَّا بِلِسَانِ قَوْمِهِ لِيُبَيِّنَ لَهُمْ وَيُضِلُّ اللَّهُ مَنْ يَشَاءُ وَيَهْدِي مَنْ يَشَاءُ وَهُوَ الْعَزِيزُ الْحَكِيمُ. Creator of the heavens and the earth says, and I have not sent a messenger except that he spoke in the language of his people, so that they may make the message clear for them. Then, after the message is delivered, the creator of the heavens and the earth guides to the straight path whomsoever he wills, and And He leaves astray whomsoever He wills. And He is the Almighty, the All-Wise. He could have done it any other way. But if you see these different nations and tribes, we understand in Islam that throughout time, the Creator of the heavens and the earth has not left human beings without guidance. And every tribe, every society, every single race and culture, throughout times, God has sent a messenger telling the people, only worship one God. Do not worship His creation. Worship Him as the Creator alone, directly. And believe in the messenger that was sent to you. So we believe that the people who were alive at the time when Jesus came to give the message of only worshiping one God, and He carried out that message within Himself because He was under submission to the will of God. He showed and embodied the very message of what it means to submit and obey. We believe that if people followed Him and believed in Him and His message, these are people of paradise. A better life after this one. The same thing with Moses. In the time of Moses, people who believed in him, his message, and you see from the very first commandment sent to him is that you will not make any graven images or similitude to God of anything that is between the heavens and the earth, and you will only worship Him alone. This message is the same message throughout humanity. So today we invite you, as I have been invited, again I've been Muslim 10 years only, to look into Islam and question it rationally, not emotionally, based on what others have said or whatever you thought. Because if we follow the misinformation, it may come from some aspect of racism or some aspect of separation between classes or race or culture or religions, and we as human beings have to sift through this and ask the Almighty to guide us. I appreciate the fact that I'm here today with you. I would like to share that if it wasn't for Islam, I may not see human beings the way I do, and it's kind of hard to think sometimes that a human being that was a gang leader and dealt with drugs and gangs and all this sort of thing, after finding Islam, can make a transition to the point that my father and my mother led them to be curious about this Islam, and they accepted Islam. Both of them accepted Islam and became Muslim. My mother-in-law accepted Islam. My wife accepted Islam. My little brother-in-law at the age of 16 years old became Muslim. And a lot of these ex-gang members have become Muslim, even rival gang members that I know in Houston. So there is some level of cure, and as Muslims, I think events like this are put together because we want to share that message with humanity. And as Allah, the Creator of the heavens and the earth, says in the Quran, "La ikraha fi din," there is no compulsion in religion. So we as Muslims know that it is a sin if we try to be compulsive in trying to change someone's religion and try to convert someone. It's actually impossible. You don't convert people. People just take consciousness of something and then they make choices. So we invite you in the Q&A, question and answers, to ask very straightforward any question that you'd like. And once again, we appreciate your time. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. This issue of teaching racism to our children, or passing on this sort of kind of stereotypical way of teaching, within a cycle, the next generation and so on, because as she mentioned, culture is important. Well, Islam gives a pretty interesting balance. It is not saying to do away with culture. In fact, in the verse we understand that He mentions that He created us in nations and tribes so we can know one another. So Islam is a way of life, and it is a universal way of life that embodies any sort of culture or ethnicity to be able to have its place. So when we talk about Islam from the aspect of submission or obedience to the Creator of the heavens and the earth, when we look at human beings, there are different cultures. There is a lot of good in it, and then there is some aspect of culture that is not so good. So we need a filter. We need to be able to pass our cultures through a filter. And when someone comes to know about Islam, that is that filter. We can keep our culture, but at least purify the bad from it. I'll give you an example. There's a place, there are certain cultures, I believe in India and some other places, that if the husband dies, the wife basically jumps into the fire. This was on Oprah Winfrey, by the way. Okay, she can't just not marry. She can't even live. And this has been passed down for generations, and it's a traditional sort of practice. So it's part of their culture. So that's not a positive aspect of culture. And no human being should have to live through that. Right? But if they only have their culture, they won't be able to have a filter to change that from. But some of those people from those cultures, when they accept Islam, they say, hold on, you can't take your life. This is something prohibited in Islam. Right? So if a person understands Islam, and I have 2 daughters, 6 years old and 4 years old, I do my best to let them see the world as it is and let them understand that there are people of different cultures, different colors, different languages, and this is an amazing thing. Because the one who created all of this is amazing for having done it this way. Imagine I was in the Red Sea over there by Egypt, which is a beautiful place to scuba dive. One of the places people from all over the world go to scuba dive. And I remember going scuba diving in this, Coral reef, and I saw colors of fish that I've never seen in my life. They look fluorescent, all kinds of colors. And it dawned on me at that point in time when I was underwater, scuba diving, I said, this is amazing. Wow. And never would a human being look and say, oh, but I don't like the yellow one, and the yellow one is less than those other ones. You wouldn't do that, because everything's amazing, right? But as soon as you come up above water, human beings will do that with one another. You won't do that with fish, but you do that with your own species. So it's something innate in nature, and we have to try our level best to get away from it. And when we detect it, stop ourselves, because our children, they don't learn what we tell them, they learn what we do. That's how children learn, it's based on what we do. And sometimes we're all guilty of it, we have these stereotypes and all that, but that's all part of the test. One thing for the people who are not Muslim in the audience that is very important, and I'll be the first to say it. Muslims are not perfect. If we try to judge Islam based on the actions of Muslims, we are going to be confused. Okay? Because Muslims is not equivalent to Islam. In the same way that the game of basketball is not equivalent to a basketball player. Basketball has rules, regulations, boundaries. But not even the best from amongst the basketball players in the history can we say has not stepped out of bounds. Has not had an infraction. Every single one of them have. So human beings are not perfect. But if you try, this is about as much as you can do. You can't be perfect. And we understand in Islam that the Creator of the heavens and the earth said that if human beings didn't make mistakes, if they were flawless, they were perfect, He would do away with them and bring about another creation that had the deficiency, basically, could make mistakes. Because the very essence of us being created is so we understand our imperfection and that we understand the perfection of the source that created us. And that when we fall short, we ask that source that created us for forgiveness. And so, based on this, we have to advise one another. And that's about as much as we can do. Sometimes some people have it ingrained in them to the point that this is the way they were brought up. But being here in America, coming to university, seeing all this pluralistic, environment and knowing Islam is the best of both worlds. And we need to try to do our best in not being that way and teach through action first and foremost. And if we ever fall short, we recognize our mistakes. We ask the Creator to guide us, and we advise one another. The the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, "Ad-din al-nasiha." This deen, this way of life is sincere advice. There you go. So the aspect of being thankful to the Creator for the fact that He brought about variety, and for the fact that He gave us the ability to have free will, to choose. We have to strive to be the best that we can be. And this is, in Islam we understand, the Prophet, peace be upon him, he said, strive basically for perfection in everything that you do. Try to do it to the best of your ability. So when we understand that the Creator of the heavens and the earth created nations and tribes so we can know one another, we should do our level best. Instead of judging and saying, because they're not like me, then they're inferior to me, or they're less than me, we should try to understand these differences and look at it as part of the diversity that the Creator Himself has brought about. And there's a beautiful understanding of one of God's attributes. We understand God through His attributes, names and attributes. And one of the names in the Arabic language is very deep if we analyze it, but it's Al-Musawwir. Al-Musawwir is the fashioner, or the one who fashioned everything, gave it its own shape, like a designer, okay? Gave it its own shape, its attributes, and gave it its own nature. So the nature of a cat, for example, is different than the nature of a cow, okay? How these two species, an insect, when you look at a whale, you start looking at this variety and diversity, and the Creator of the heavens and the earth, He creates with no previous mold, from nothing. Imagine the creativity behind creating so many diverse things in the universe. That should lead one to reflect and say, God is great. And in the end, if we come down to that conclusion, then we can strive to be the best human being we can be. And as He mentions in the verse, the best from amongst you is the one that's most God conscious, the one who understands that you have a responsibility to Him. And we try to do our best until basically our final day.